afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Fuchs, and I'm a Senior Specialist for the Community Education Department at MDA. We're thrilled to have you join us for today's webinar on air travel policies and procedures. This learning event is part of our larger MDA community education programs, which focus on bringing the neuromuscular disease community together around education and resources. Be sure to visit the Community Education section on mda.org for updates on upcoming events. We are recording today's event and we'll be posting it to our website for on-demand viewing at a later date along with a companion print material. Everyone registered for today's session will receive that information in their inbox. Please know that all phone lines have been muted, but you can still ask questions. We will have a Q&A session at the end of each speaker's presentation. Simply use the chat feature to type in your questions, and feel free to type in your questions as they come up. And like I said, they will be addressed at the end of the speaker's presentation. MDA would like to thank Amicus Therapeutics for supporting today's webinar. And for nearly 75 years, MDA has led the way in funding research to accelerate the development of new treatments, expanding access to care and clinical trials through the MDA Care Center Network, and advocating for access and inclusion for the neuromuscular disease community. MDA delivers its mission through research, care, advocacy, and engagement. Since its inception, MDA has invested more than $1.1 billion in neuromuscular disease research. MDA funds projects throughout the drug development process, from early discovery through translational stages and infrastructure support for clinical trials. MDA care centers are located at over 150 top medical institutions nationwide, providing care from clinicians who specialize in neuromuscular disease. MDA's advocacy network focuses on support for accelerated approvals and novel research, access to healthcare, treatments, independent living, newborn screening, accessible air travel, and more. This focus plays a vital role in shaping laws and policies that support the needs of people living with rare neuromuscular diseases. Our community education and recreation programs are designed to connect individuals and families. We are committed to building a nurturing environment where our members can share experiences, triumphs, and challenges. In 2023, we offered over 40 educational programs, over 20 summer camps, and dozens of other community activities, both in person and virtually. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to join the MDA community by registering with us. Registering is free, and please see the link in the chat for more information. To learn more about MDA, you can also visit mda.org. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Shannon Wood joined MDA in April as a Director of Disability Policy, where she works to ensure that members of the neuromuscular community can learn, work, travel, and socialize without discrimination by advancing policies that maximize our community's access to key programs and services. Prior to joining MDA, Shannon served as a Director of Advocacy and Policy at the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, where she advocated on health and disability policy issues impacting people affected by MS. She also brings experience from previous state and federal advocacy roles with the American Psychological Association. Our next speaker is Danica Gonzalves, who is the Senior Advocacy Attorney at Paralyzed Veterans of America. Focusing on accessibility for mobility device users, Danica advocates for the rights of people with disabilities to safe and accessible air travel and transportation, hotels, healthcare, recreation, and everyday life. She also serves as co-chair on the Consortium for Constituents with Disabilities Transportation Task Force. Danica graduated from the George Washington University Law School, where she advocated for people and students with disabilities. After law school, she was awarded an Equal Justice Works Fellowship and built a nationwide program to fight for justice for veterans with mental health conditions and those who experience military sexual trauma. Our final speaker today is Steve Cullen. He is the Chief Operating Officer, excuse me, for AeroSmart Communities and a former COO of aerospace companies, including one specializing in avionics, interior refurbishments, maintenance, and finishes for corporate aircraft, which use the same airframe as commercial aircraft. Steve is a former Chief Strategy Officer of a surgical instrument management and consulting company. He is a veteran of the U.S. Air Force with operations and operational requirements experience, including over 10 years working in Washington, D.C. He advocates as a volunteer for the Muscular Dystrophy Association's Advocacy Institute and for Rare Disease Legislative Advocates, a program of the Every Life Foundation for Rare Diseases, and is a member of the Disabled American Veterans. His board experience includes Instruments of Mercy, a nonprofit organization repairing donated surgical instruments for healthcare providers for medical mission trips. Steve earned a doctorate degree, MBA, MS, and BS, and was a National Defense Fellow at the Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government. Thank you all for being here today. And for now, I will turn the time over to Shannon.
Thank you. Go ahead and share my screen. Are you all seeing the full screen slide?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me to speak with you all about a really important topic and one we certainly hear from advocates on often, and that's air travel accessibility, which we know from the all too many injuries and mishandlings that occur is just not where it needs to be. That being said, there have been important strides made thanks to the work of MDA, advocates, including those on the call, and certainly the awesome leaders that are co-presenting with me today. So I will be covering air travel policy, focusing in on the Air Carrier Access Act and recent rulemaking from the Department of Transportation. So first, I want to talk about the issue. MDA and the neuromuscular disease community have long raised the alarm about the dangerous, undignified nature of air travel for people with disabilities. We know about the inadequate training, the damaged wheelchairs, injuries, even deaths. People affected by neuromuscular disease have stood up and shared their stories with federal agencies, lawmakers, the media to really raise awareness and drive action. At MDA, we approach this advocacy through a number of different levers, through Congress, especially during FAA reauthorization. I know many of you took action during that process, and then also through regulations through federal agencies. Here at MDA, we mobilize advocates to inform the decisions of policymakers, and we've made a really big impact. And to that end, I want to share a short clip from our advocate, Madison, during the 2024 FAA reauthorization process. It's a short clip, and note that the sound doesn't start for a few seconds, but if you still don't hear anything by the time Madison starts speaking, just let me know.
Hi, my name is Maddie Lawson, and I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. Hi, my name is Maddie Lawson, and I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. If I could speak to Congress, I think the biggest thing that I would want to ask them and have them help me with is how do I hold the airlines accountable? People with neuromuscular diseases, our bodies depend on the customization of the chair. I've been hospitalized before from damage done to my chair. When you break your wheelchair, which is literally our legs, it can take months and months and months before anyone even looks at it or assesses the damages and fixes it. I know my rights as a disabled passenger. Things are not followed through the way that they are legally supposed to be, and nobody changes until they're held accountable.
So hopefully the sound worked for that. I think Madison just does a great job speaking to the perspective of the neuromuscular disease community and why federal action is needed. All right, so what has Congress done to address the issue, and really what are your rights? So let's start with the landmark Air Carrier Access Act. This was passed in 1986, and it guarantees non-discriminatory treatment when traveling by air. And it actually helped lay the groundwork for the ADA a few years later. In 1990, the Department of Transportation issued regulations to implement the law, which put new requirements on airlines, and I want to walk through them. First up, non-discrimination requirements. An airline may not refuse transport except for safety, nor may they cap the number of passengers with disabilities on a flight. If they do deny transport, they must write with the reason why within 10 days. With very few exceptions, they may not require you to travel with another person. Prior to the ACA, there were companion requirements. If they do require you to do so, they cannot charge for an assistance transportation. If you choose to travel with a PCA or a safety assistant, but the airline does not require it, they can charge. Aircraft accessibility features. For all new aircraft and any aircraft undergoing certain renovations, there were new aircraft accessibility feature requirements around onboard wheelchairs, seat rests. Advance notice rules. Airlines may require 48 hours advance notice and 1 hour advance check-in for certain reasons. Those include power wheelchairs on smaller planes, packaging for batteries, things like incubator and respirator hookup. I know we got some questions about that. Using a stretcher, also groups of 10, so a sports team with disabilities traveling together, or provision of onboard wheelchairs. Around stowage, airlines must allow wheelchairs to be surrendered and returned as close to the airplane door as possible, so essentially the jet bridge, and have priority. Battery-powered wheelchairs must be accepted if the cargo size allows, and batteries can't be separated unless to meet hazmat rules. Really importantly, assistive devices are to be returned in the same condition as received. Airlines can't require you to sign a waiver for damage or loss of your wheelchair, and they must pay for any repair or replacement. Ventilators and respirators, again, can be used on board, and they can be stored overhead or under seats, consistent with carry-on rules. Boarding and deplaning assistance. So those individuals who identify as a person with a disability at the gate and need additional time to board or get assistance being seated or stowing their equipment, they must be allowed to pre-board and receive assistance in boarding, deplaning, making connections, and moving between gates. Hand carrying a passenger on or off a plane is prohibited unless it's an emergency evacuation, and people may not be left alone, unattended in ground wheelchairs or boarding or aisle chairs for more than 30 minutes. Seating accommodations. You may not be kept from sitting in any seat except as required by safety regs, and airlines must, upon request, provide seats with movable armrests to passengers who can't transfer over those fixed armrests, as well as seats next to personal care assistants. Also, bulkhead or other appropriate seat for service animals or those with a fused or immobilized leg. They are not required to provide more than one seat unless purchased, or seat you in another class than the one purchased. So they can't bump you to first class. Service animals. They must allow service animals unless it poses a safety risk, is too large to be accommodated, or causes significant disruption. They can make two inquiries. They can ask, one, is the animal required to accompany you because of a disability? And two, what work or task has it been trained to perform? They can also require a service animal transportation form at least 48 hours in advance. Training of airline personnel and contractors. This is a really important element of the law. On aircraft with at least 19 seats, airlines must train to proficiency all staff who deal with the public on equipment and procedures that safeguard the rights of passengers with disabilities. Important updates that we're going to come back to with the new rule. So fast forward to 2022, the Department of Transportation under Secretary Buttigieg published the first Passengers with Disabilities Bill of Rights. And this was really to help educate people about their rights under the ACA that we just covered. I do want to note that this did not expand or restrict your rights. It just summarized existing laws. All right, so let's talk about the very recent rule, December of last year, from the Department of Transportation to really strengthen and clarify those ACAA regulations. So as many of you know, MDA and advocates were very heavily engaged in the process, and final rule became effective on January 16th, although very importantly, compliance dates may vary by the provision, so we're going to walk through each of them. First up is safe and dignified assistance. The final rule clarified that safe and dignified assistance is required. It defines safe as not at heightened risk of bodily injury, including loss or damage to wheelchairs resulting in bodily injury. And it defines dignified to mean respecting independence, autonomy, and privacy. That means that transfers ensure clothing is not removed, not unduly delaying restroom access such that a person soils themselves, and to the maximum extent possible, speaking directly with the passenger and not a caregiver or travel companion. Around prompt enplaning, deplaning, and connecting assistance, it clarified that prompt assistance is required, including moving within a terminal, with prompt based on the circumstances except to disembark, in which case prompt means that staff and a boarding chair are there to deplane you when the last passenger who doesn't need assistance departs, and your chair is as close as possible to that aircraft door to the maximum extent possible, again, except where it goes against security regulations or if you request it in another location. In that case, an airport wheelchair must be available for you to use. Rebuttable presumption of a violation. This is around mishandled wheelchairs. The final rule defines mishandled to mean lost, delayed, damaged, or pilfered, essentially stolen. It clarifies that airlines must return checked wheelchairs in the condition they were received. And it specifies that whenever it is not, there is a rebuttable presumption that the airline mishandled the wheelchair in violation of the ACAA. Passenger notifications, there's a few different elements here to required information from the airlines. So prior to departure, they must notify in writing when you're checking a wheelchair that if it's mishandled, you have the right to contact a CRO or a complaints resolution officer and to file a claim with the airline. They must also provide contact information for that CRO. It also requires notifications when wheelchairs have been loaded or if it didn't fit before the cabin door closes. And the compliance date there is December of this year. Upon arrival, airlines are required to notify when wheelchairs have been unloaded before deplaning. That compliance date is also December. After a wheelchair is mishandled, it requires notification in writing of your rights to 1, file a claim, 2, receive a loaner with certain customizations, and 3, the option to choose a preferred vendor for repairs or replacement, as well as have a CRO available and contact information for that CRO. The compliance date here is on or after March 17th. Status updates are required on delayed wheelchairs, and per the final rule, all notifications must be timely, accurate, and accessible. While not convinced by airline arguments that it would take 18 to 24 months to develop the technology needed, they were given 1 year to develop procedures and train staff. Aircraft cargo holes. It requires airlines to prominently publish on their websites the cargo hold dimensions. Some of you, this may be sounding familiar. This is codifying language that was in the 2024 Reauthorization Act. And then prompt return of delayed wheelchairs. Airlines are required to get a delayed wheelchair to its destination within 24 hours for domestic flights or short haul international flights, so under 12 hours, or within 30 hours for those long-haul international flights. And they're required to present you the option of either picking it up at the destination airport or having it delivered to another reasonable location, such as a hotel or home. All right, there is more to this rule, so we're almost through. Continuing on with the new rule, reimbursement for accessible ground transportation. The final rule requires airlines to reimburse for transportation to or from the airport as a direct result of a wheelchair delay. The airlines may require receipts or invoices, but must reimburse you within 30 days of getting that documentation. We at MDA had shared that passengers should be entitled to additional provable costs, so things like medical care due to having to use an inadequate loaner, or additional personal care services, lost wages. And that was really to incentivize airlines to put in place policies that reduce the number of mishandlings to begin with. The department did not expand beyond ground transportation in the final rule. Prompt repair or replacement of damaged wheelchairs. So following a chair mishandling, airlines must give a reasonable time frame to inspect your chair and file a claim. They must offer options on or after March 17th of A, the carrier handling and paying for prompt repair or replacement with equal or greater function and safety, or B, you arranging for it through a preferred vendor with the carrier handling transport and vendor payment. They must promptly review any complaints of insufficient repairs. We know that those complaints of insufficient repairs would really sit and linger. So hopefully this addresses that. Around loaner wheelchairs, airlines are required to provide and pay for loaners while you're waiting for return, repair, or replacement of a mishandled chair. In consultation with the passenger to make sure that that loaner fits functional and safety needs as much as possible. If it does not meet your needs, they must allow you to secure an alternative loaner better than the one offered, and then also reimburse you for the cost within 30 days, although airlines may require receipts for reimbursement. Reimbursement of fare difference. So the final rule requires reimbursing the difference between the fare on a flight that a passenger took and the fare on a flight that they would have taken if their wheelchair had been able to fit. This requirement is just for flights on the same day, same airline, same origin and destination. The compliance date here is March 17th of this year. And in line with MDA and disability community recommendations, the final rule does require an opportunity to disembark and rebook on the next available flight of the same carrier or a partner carrier if a wheelchair can fit, as soon as the airline becomes aware that it does not fit on the regularly scheduled flight. Seating accommodations. The final rule requires providing, in consultation with disability rights organizations, safe and adequate seating when waiting for a delayed wheelchair or loaner. The compliance date here is December 17th, 2025. And then enhanced training. So this is, again, a really big component of the ACAA. Very meaningful and important to advocates. And following our comments and the disability community comments, the 2024 FAA Reauthorization Act requirement, the final rule requires for the first time that airline training address certain topics. One is wheelchair disassembly and reassembly, proper loading and securement, safe and dignified transfers, which has been hugely important to our community, and also proper use of equipment. They were persuaded by comments that skill adoption be demonstrated. So the final rule does require successful skill demonstration, which really strengthens the existing requirement that they train just to proficiency, which we knew was not sufficient. The deadline here is June 17th, 2026, with refreshers required every year. That training must be hands-on and is also required of managers and supervisors in line with MDA and disability community comments, given the role that managers and supervisors play when an issue arises. Last, new improved standards for onboard wheelchairs. The final rule requires new improved performance standards for onboard wheelchairs on twin-aisle aircraft, consistent with standards for single-aisle aircraft, and it requires all onboard wheelchairs for aircraft with more than 60 seats to meet these new standards by October 2031. So that was a lot of information, but I think it's really important as passengers with disabilities that you know your rights under the law and what protections pertain to you. Equally as important is to file complaints when you feel that your rights have been violated, which I know we'll cover in just a little bit here. Now, I did want to cover some questions that we had received beforehand.
Yes, thanks so much, Shannon.
So I received a couple from Sarah. One was, what should I know as a future traveler in February? Certainly know your rights. Reach out to your airline early. Another question was around advice for flying with a ventilator. This was covered a little bit in what I had shared, but you can pre-board with your ventilator, work with your airline early, work with staff and the crew once you're on the flight. Again, they can require advance notice for ventilators, so reach out to them early on. Another question we received was, how do you refuse to leave your seat at disembarkment because the airline doesn't get your wheelchair to the plane door? So federal law does, on passenger behavior, still require passengers with disabilities to follow crew member instructions, including instructions to disembark the aircraft. I know Danica will be covering the complaint process and what remedies you have available when you feel your rights have been violated. I also received a question, what aid can a person get at the airports? And do you know airlines know to provide aid? Any agencies to provide companions on trips? On agencies to provide companions on trips, I would refer you to MDA's Resource Center. They can kind of work through your specifics, what's available to you. In terms of aid at the airport, we've covered what you're entitled to under the law. Certainly work with airline staff early. Again, TSA passenger support specialist. There's the TSA CARES program. The Resource Center can provide you with more information on that. How do you volunteer to help train the employees in your area? I love this. You can certainly reach out to airlines, to disability service offices at airports, or consider becoming an advocate with MDA, and we'll definitely keep you in the loop on opportunities to engage in training regulations and other air travel accessibility advocacy opportunities. Very last, has the new FAA bill that MDA has been trying to get passed been completely approved by Congress yet? Yes, the FAA Reauthorization Act is now the FAA Reauthorization Law. We have another webinar covering what all was in that reauthorization package, some different dates to be aware of, and I think we can drop that in the chat. But I'll stop there and turn it back to Sarah.
I apologize, my mute button was not working. I think you addressed a lot of the questions that we have. Let's see here. How do you know that staff has been trained?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think, we have certainly seen disrespectful interactions. We've seen people have these experiences where it's clear that staff were not trained to proficiency, right, as required by the law. I think there's no way of knowing, I guess, or kind of certifying that. I will say, to the strengthened training required by the new rule, they said that successful skill demonstration was required, but they did not require competency assessments or really say how that might be done. So that will largely be on airlines to figure out. Perfect, I hope that helps. That might not have been a perfect answer.
No, I think it's great. Thank you. It looks like we're going to take one more question. So it looks like someone says, can the airline force you to deplane without your customized wheelchair at the gate? They insist that you use their manual wheelchair and wait in the lounge.
So if crew is instructing you to disembark, federal law that dictates passenger behavior on flights does require you to disembark. I think some of this may be covered in later content on the webinar around the complaint process, but you certainly must follow crew instructions there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to move on to our next speaker, Danica Gonzalves. And Danica, just let me know when you want me to move forward because I'll be sharing your slides. So let me know when you're ready and go ahead and take it away.
You can start with this slide, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Danica Gonzalves. I'm a senior advocacy attorney at Paralyzed Veterans of America. For a visual description, I am a white woman in my mid-30s. I have long brown hair, and I'm wearing a blue dress with a black blazer. Paralyzed Veterans of America is a membership organization of veterans with a spinal cord injury or disorder, and virtually all use mobility devices due to their disabilities. So at Paralyzed Veterans of America, I do work a lot on transportation for mobility device users, including in air travel. Sarah, next slide, please. So this is where I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit. At PVA and advocacy in general, we need the voices of the people that are experiencing these issues. When it comes to air travel specifically, we need to hear from the passengers of what their experience are with the personnel, with their wheelchairs being damaged, with anything that you experience. Shannon did cover the laws and regulations that do apply, and that includes the Air Carrier Access Act that was passed in 1986. So for those who know, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. So this law actually passed before the Americans with Disabilities Act. But this law cannot actually be enforced unless we know what is happening. As the advocate was saying in the video at the beginning of this webinar, nothing changes until airlines are held accountable. The only way that the airlines are held accountable is if the complaints are filed. And these complaints need to come from the passengers. This can be yourself or the loved ones that you are traveling with. Complaints bring awareness to the issue. We recently had the wheelchair user and air travel regulation come out in December. This regulation was prompted because of passengers sharing their experiences. It came from the thousands of complaints that were filed by passengers. It came from people raising their voices saying, this is an issue that we need to address. That voice is what is the most important thing for advocacy. Even when they were proposing this regulation, the Department of Transportation was citing direct stories of what people had experienced. They were citing complaints that had been filed. You can be an advocate, and you are the best advocate when you share your story or the stories of your loved ones. And complaints are not just a single issue. When something happens and a complaint is filed, and there are hundreds of complaints that are saying that they are having the same issue, especially with the same airline, this is showing a bigger problem. This is showing that there are systematic violations. Shannon did touch on training, and someone, I believe, asked, how do we know if the personnel are not adequately trained? When it comes to our complaints, if an injury occurs, that is showing that the personnel are not adequately trained. Because if they were trained to proficiency, that passenger should not be experiencing injuries. A lot of passengers know how they should be transferred. Some of our members, they don't necessarily need the individuals to physically lift them onto the aisle chair, though they do need that aisle chair assistance to board. When the personnel are not listening to the passenger, this can show that they're not adequately trained in how to interact with the passengers. So often, if there is anything that occurs that is unsafe, if there's anything that occurs that shows that the personnel from the airline are not treating the passengers with dignity, this is going to be reflective of the type of training they are receiving. These complaints have been very, very successful. The regulation that just came out in December that provides additional protections for mobility device users, specifically wheelchair users and scooter users in air travel, was a huge win. And this came from people raising their voices again and those complaints. I'm going to keep going back to those two things because they are so important to advocacy. Advocates, anyone can be an advocate. When you're telling your story, when you're filing complaints, when you're encouraging other people to share their experiences, that is advocacy. And sometimes these complaints don't even need to be those ones that are officially filed. Social media has also shown that it can be a place for advocates to go. There are videos where someone filmed their wheelchair being damaged, or even another passenger's wheelchair being damaged, that have garnered millions of views. This is highlighting the issues that continue to impact passengers with disabilities every single day. You can move to the next slide, please, Sarah. So sometimes people come to us and ask, when should they file the complaint? The answer that I will always give people is every single time there is a violation of the law. We have covered, Shannon covered the Air Carrier Access Act, and some of the major issues that when these occur, you should absolutely be filing a complaint. And that is when a mobility device is damaged, lost, destroyed, or now pilfered, that was just added via the newest regulation. If there was a mobility device that was damaged, not only are there additional protections now for the passenger under the new regulation, but complaints should be filed. The airlines are supposed to keep statistics on the number of mishandled mobility devices, but if passengers are filing their complaints that show that this is continuing to be an issue with this airline, the Department of Transportation may actually take action. At minimum, it shows that there are systematic violations, that this is a major repetitive pattern for this airline. If there are improper or unsafe aisle chair transfers, we've had many members at Paralyzed Veterans of America that have suffered very serious injuries during these physical aisle chair transfers. If someone receive, they have an unsafe aisle chair transfer that results in an injury, that should be an incident where you should file a complaint. There are a lot of accommodations that the airlines are supposed to provide for passengers with disabilities, and that includes that aisle chair assistance if you request it. The airline cannot require a passenger to accept aisle chair assistance if they do not need it. So all of these are via request. If someone says to the airline personnel that they need additional time to pre-board, they should be given pre-boarded. This also includes the seating accommodations that Shannon already covered, and also returning a passenger's mobility device during layovers if that is requested. I'll be honest, that doesn't happen a lot, but they are supposed to do that, especially if it's a long layover. They should not have passengers sitting in the airport wheelchairs that especially cannot be independently utilized. And also failure to promptly return a passenger's mobility device. There were questions where people were asking, like, what do you do if they're trying to force you to get off the plane? If they're trying to get you, have you get off the plane and your personal mobility device is not near the door, if you requested, that's where it can be returned to and where it should be returned per FAA regulations, that would be another incident where you can file a complaint. And just failure to treat a passenger with a disability safely and in a dignified manner. Anytime these are experienced, a complaint is something that should be considered. Next slide, Sarah. So there are several ways on how to file complaints. Often passengers will file a complaint directly with the airline. This would mean going on the airline's website. Often, how to file a complaint, the airline tries to kind of embed it in a place where it's not readily apparent how passengers can do this. They should be changing this, hopefully, under the new regulations. But with these type of complaints, all that happens is that the statistics should be reported to the Department of Transportation. You can also file directly with the Department of Transportation as an informal complaint. I don't want you to think that it doesn't mean much because it has the word informal. It's just a distinguishment from the other type. So this is filed directly with the department. They review it, they send it to the airline has to respond, and then the Department of Transportation will make a determination on whether the law was violated. So this escalates the complaint a bit. And the next is a formal complaint. These you usually do need legal representation because you have to file briefs. There are responses by the airline's attorneys, and there are no monetary damages attached to these formal complaints. But no matter what type of complaint is filed, it all makes a difference. Next slide. So just to highlight two recent advocacy wins, in October of last year, the Department of Transportation did issue a $50 million penalty against American Airlines for its treatment of passengers who use wheelchairs. This was historic. It was the biggest penalty ever issued against an airline due to violations of the Air Carrier Access Act. This was initiated by 3 formal complaints that PBA filed. These complaints included over 20 flights. They were due to injuries during aisle chair transfers, broken, destroyed wheelchairs that the airlines were not repairing or replacing in a prompt manner, even in a reasonable manner. It came from the undignified treatment of the passengers with disabilities. And we just brought it all together and filed this to show that this was a systematic issue with American Airlines. After an investigation, the department did issue this $50 million penalty. But it wasn't just the formal complaints filed by PBA. This was substantiated by the thousands of complaints filed by other passengers and also based on the number of broken, destroyed, mishandled mobility devices by the airline. In September of 2023, United Airlines also settled with the Department of Transportation to improve the air travel experience. This was an investigation opened after the death of a disability advocate in Gracia Figueroa. The airline did damage her wheelchair, and she was forced to use a loaner wheelchair that didn't meet the needs for her disability. She ended up having health complications and did die as a result. With this, United Airlines did have a settlement. They now have a search filter that shows which flights can accommodate your mobility device. And hopefully these continue to set precedent that the department will enforce the Air Carrier Access Act, including the new regulations. Next slide, please. So to sum it up, you can be an advocate. The advocates are not just those of us who are in DC that are going to the Hill. Any passenger can be an advocate. If you raise your voice, if you tell your story, you tell a story of your loved ones or other passengers with disabilities, this is what leads to change. Next slide, please. So this is my contact information. You can also go to the PBA website. We have significant resources on air travel, especially for mobility device users. And I believe we're moving to Q&A.
We are. Thank you so much, Danica. Let me just pull up my document here. I saw a lot in the chat. Let me just pull this up. Alrighty, we'll start with what size scooters can we travel with?
There is no set dimensions in the law that says this is the max you can travel with. There is going to be, there are going to be concerns if you have a larger, such as like a power wheelchair, that it may not be able to fit in the cargo hold of the aircraft itself. There are new requirements under the wheelchair user regulation that came out in December that the airline, if they have another flight that can accommodate the mobility device, will have to refund that fare difference. But essentially, to sum it up, there's not like exact dimensions, but you do have to be careful on the dimensions of the mobility device, and the airline should be posting the dimensions of the cargo hold on their aircrafts.
Great, thank you. Next question. My son's wheelchair was damaged. Claim was filed but denied because ground staff lied and said that it was already damaged. How do we navigate this?
So this is the exact situation on when you would want to file those complaints. So complaints, as far as the informal and formal, do need to be filed within 6 months, 180 days. I still recommend filing if it's been longer than that, if it's been like a reasonable time period past that, because especially under the new wheelchair user regulation, there's now this presumption that if the airline had the mobility device in their custody, they were the ones that damaged it. What I also recommend to passengers is to take pictures of your mobility device before you give it over to the airline personnel, and then take pictures when you receive it back, because now you have like actual proof where you can show this is what it looked like when I gave it to them, and this is what it looked like when I got it back.
Perfect. Great ideas. This person says, I have MG and can still walk, often have issues being accepted into first boarding. How do I navigate the attacks and attitudes from staff?
So under the Air Carrier Access Act, if you self-identify at the gate as needing additional time to board, they're required to give you pre-boarding. As Shannon was talking about, and also the individual in the video, it's really important to know your rights, to know that you do have this right to pre-boarding if you need additional time to board. We do hear many, many stories, I'll be honest, of the attitudes, of the ways that personnel treat an individual that is requesting a pre-board, especially if it's not apparently visible that they need that time. But always know your rights to ask. And if they do treat you in that manner, you can always file a complaint. And also request to speak to a CRO. That is a right you have as well. It's an on-site complaint resolution officer that is specifically trained in disability-related complaints.
Perfect, thank you. I think that answers another question. If you're not a paralyzed veteran, who do you file a complaint with? So I think that answers that question as well. Let me see here. So what do you do if you have a custom wheelchair that has a smart drive attached? Does that go in the stowaway and the wheelchair goes in the coupe? That is a $10,000 unit, so I get concerned with damage.
With smart drives specifically, because they often have the lithium battery, our members report that they'll remove them from the wheelchair before it is stowed, depending on how well trained the airline personnel are and also the airline policy. Sometimes they do take the smart drive only and stow it in the cabin. What we recommend with the smart drives is if you can remove that before you hand off your wheelchair, because they may choose to put your wheelchair in the cargo and then put the smart drive in the cabin. So it kind of depends on what the airline's policy are for the batteries in the smart drive.
Understood, thank you. What do you do / who do you complain to if the airport personnel do something improper? I know someone who was inappropriately touched by a male airport personnel member while he was securing the seatbelt.
So when it comes to a non-disability related complaint, if you go to the Department of Transportation's website, it should have the information on what office that goes to. Each type of complaint essentially goes or can go to different offices. So the complaints that we were talking about specifically are disability related complaints. If you go to the website for the Department of Transportation and click the file a complaint, it will ask you what you are filing the complaint about and direct you to the appropriate office to do so.
That's good to know. Thank you. We'll take a couple more before we move on to Steve. And then if we have time at the end, we can always circle back around to see if there's any leftover questions. When filing a complaint, is there an organization or organizations that should be CC'd on an email?
So the informal complaints are not sent via email. They're sent on a form that is on the Department of Transportation's website. So since that form is submitted directly to the department, there wouldn't be an organization you can CC. If you are a member of an organization that does disability rights, perhaps you want to, especially if they do advocacy and air travel, you could forward that email to them because then you are sharing your story with the people that are doing the advocacy on your behalf. So always keep a copy of what you're submitting. If you ever wrote an email or a letter directly to the airline, save it, because all of this is something that the advocates can use moving forward.
Perfect. Can I stow my manual collapsible wheelchair in the cabin?
So that question, I'm going to go with sometimes, because there are times that you can. It also can depend if there are other manual wheelchairs, the size of the manual wheelchair, etc. There are situations where they are required to give priority stowage in cabin to a collapsible manual wheelchair, but there are also some exceptions, exemptions, etc.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then we'll finish off with this one. Well, it looks like we still have some questions about this person, their wheelchair was damaged, similar to another question. They filed the damage claim at baggage handling, but the claim was denied as baggage staff claimed it was damaged before loading, thus they denied the claim. How should I approach this case as they only believe their ground staff? I know you talked about the photos before. Would they show that to the baggage handling person that's processing the complaint?
So, with the changes that just came out in the wheelchair user regulation in December, there now is the legal term rebuttable presumption that the airline damaged the wheelchair. So, we are going to see additional protections for the passengers. Before, we did hear often that the airline would say, that wasn't us. You gave it to us damaged. This is how we got it. This is how we returned it. And that's why this new regulation was so important and really did revolutionize the rights of passengers with disabilities, especially mobility device users, because there now is that avenue to still file. And I still recommend as a best practice to take pictures or even a video just showing all parts of the mobility device. But there are those rights that were now just created, but that did just come out in December. So very, very new, but that does create those additional protections.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Danica. Like I said, we're going to move on just to make sure Steve has enough time to present his portion. Steve, if you are ready, I am going to pass the time over to you and continue to submit your questions because, like I said, after Steve's presentation, we will answer as many questions as we can. Take it away, Steve. Oh, I think you're on mute, Steve.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, and I will share my screen. And are you seeing my screen?
Yep, I can see it.
Am I in slide mode?
It is not in presentation mode currently.
How about now?
It stopped sharing.
How about now?
Oh, it's loading. Yep, all in presentation mode. You're all set.
Thank you. My name's Steve Cullen, and for a visual description, I'm an older white male with some hair left on top, and I'm wearing a blue tie, blue shirt, and a blue blazer. And I am here today representing All Wheels Ump, and also to talk about a couple experiences that I know that where filing complaints is very important. So I appreciate this opportunity. So as I stated, I'm representing All Wheels Ump, and our mission is to basically increase awareness for safer and more dignified, accessible air travel through research and advocacy. And that is our sole focus, and it's been our focus for almost 15 years, looking at how we get to where there are wheelchairs on commercial aircraft. And with our primary focus being on that research and crash test, we know based on testing that started back in 2016 that wheelchairs and restraint systems can meet FAA standards in terms of airworthiness and in emergency situations. In fact, we used the 2016 test to help in advocacy on the Hill in Washington, D.C., that led to the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018, requiring the Transportation Review Board to do a study to show and support that basically what we showed them could be done. So from a technical standpoint, we know that the design and engineering is all possible. But we continue to advocate and collaborate for accessible air travel through a number of different forums. And it is everything from additional testing to even studies to show airlines how they can be profitable by putting space on commercial aircraft for wheelchairs and that. And it has been a very much a collaborative effort. On the slide, there are a number of initiatives that are done in terms of advocacy, from knocking on doors on Capitol Hill to going to the White House to talk to them, to a global forum every year where we bring a number of stakeholders together to address issues on accessible travel. There's also a National Accessible Air Travel Day, and this will be the third year that it's recognized to take and create awareness of the challenges of travel for people with disabilities. And in our advocacy, and also we know for what we're trying to do to get wheelchairs, a wheelchair spot on commercial aircraft, it takes the filing of complaints and it takes the advocacy of a lot of people. And in doing that, we rely on coalitions. And right now, based on after many years of knocking on doors, the past, especially 3 to 4 years, it's probably the brightest we've seen in that time frame for advocating and moving things along, including looking at the enforcement of laws by airlines and airports, etc. But some of the, when I say it's the brightest, it was, MDA and PVA and All Wheels Up and other organizations knocking on doors and working, collaborating to get the changes that were put into the FAA Reauthorization Act that was just passed last year. Took a lot of work, and it's the best FAA Reauthorization Act that's addressing accessible air travel that's ever been passed in that. So a lot going on. It's also working and in a group that's was led by PVA, and MDA was involved in it, and about 50 other organizations pushing to provide input to US DOT on what's required for safe and dignified travel for people who require, whether it's wheelchairs or scooters, but accessible travel. And it doesn't happen without collaboration. The global forum that we hold every year is 150 plus stakeholders from Boeing to Airbus to MDA to FAA to PVA to the US DOT to universities, manufacturers, all coming together to look at how we can provide solutions to achieving a wheelchair spot on airplanes. And we know that even though these efforts are going on, we've got a long ways to go, and every voice is needed. I know Danica and Shannon have said that your voices in filing is very important. It is, and we will not do it unless we have a huge collaboration, and it's got to be constant in terms of change. And the graphic that you see on the screen is a card that we hand out. And in my U.S. representative's office, they say that this card is the card that gets handed out the most to constituents when they come in. And what it simply does is it provides with a QR code your rights that were presented earlier. And also, if you use the one on the right, it'll take you to how you file to file that complaint. So for the 400 to 500 of you out there, take a snapshot, and you'll see it about 2 more times if you miss it. What we do know is that, and we know the first bullet up there in terms of passenger filing complaints played a role in the finding of America. We know from a meeting prior to an embargo meeting where FAA, or excuse me, the US DOT told us that the people who filed helped create the awareness and get this moving. So filing is extremely important. Even if you're filing, you don't get resolution that you're looking for, it's important to file. And on the graphic, other than the pandemic, we're seeing that there's been an increase in the filing. And we would like to think that that this is based on an increased awareness among passengers with disabilities about that they have rights, and there is a process for filing complaints. It's out there on social media, it's advocacy efforts, it's better dissemination of information through webinars like this that allow you to know what your rights are and that it is important to continue to file. Now, what can you do? Well, one of the things is to continue to file with the airlines and to notify the airlines. Airlines have a complaint resolution official, a CRO, and that person is there to address concerns, problems that may occur. And if you ask to talk to the CRO, you may end up having to call them or reach them other ways, or they may be present to talk to you. So ask for a CRO when you have an issue at the airport with an airline. A lot of times people will file an airline incident or a damage report and they stop there. Don't stop just there. It's important that when you file with the airlines, and whether it's an incident or damage report, that you also file with the US DOT. Otherwise, that complaint may not be heard. And where we're seeing that there's very good movement is at the US DOT level, where the filing of complaints has been important. And although it's normally considered one of those last resorts, you always have the opportunity to file a congressional inquiry. And that congressional inquiry normally goes from the congressional office to, in this case, US DOT, to answer the question and finding out what is going on for that constituent. So know that you have several avenues in which to take and file a complaint to try to get satisfactory resolution of the issue that you're addressing. And know your rights. It's been in this presentation, and please take the QR code and take it with you. I have someone within the family that uses this on airline flights that goes to the rights, and also able to go to if they have to file a complaint. But you need to be persistent and consistent in terms of filing complaints when anything happens. I was asked to provide a couple of examples, and I know for passengers who will use wheelchairs, there are a couple examples that have been discussed. And even Corey Lee, who's a travel blogger, has documented multiple instances of mistreatments and challenges in filings. So if you're in that situation, continue to do it. But there are others, and one of them was asked about earlier, and that's what I'll call invisible disabilities, and also laws not enforced. And I'm going to like to walk you through two of them. This first one is the laws not enforced, and the example is what is called no man's land. And this is something that happens all the time. And no man's land is that area from the curb when you arrive at an airport to the airline desk. And it's no man's land because a lot of times there is no assistant and no assistance, and no one's out there to greet you and help you through the process. Well, airlines by law are required to provide wheelchair assistance from the terminal entrance, which includes that drop-off point, to the gate when you depart, and from the gate when you land to the terminal entrance or the vehicle pickup. However, it is often, it can be found in the case that I'm presenting, no assistance was provided at LAX, and it didn't happen just one time, but multiple times. And this particular one happened last May in that. The individual, and I do not use names or relationships because I hope you can understand, to protect their privacy and their names and that. But in this case, the person asked for the help at the airline desk, had a CRO, but no assistance was provided at all. And the individual had to make their own way through, and from the drop-off point to the desk and onward in that. They filed an airline incident report. They filed a complaint with the US DOT, and even went as far as filing a congressional inquiry with the US representative. And at that point reached out to me as to how I could help, and provided her contacts with others. The sad part about this one, and it's one that it happens a lot, but I also don't want people to be discouraged, is as of Friday, there still had not heard back from any of the organizations, including DOT, in terms of the complaint and what had happened. And this particular one in no man's land is an issue of enforcement of laws. And it is happens a lot. And until there are complaints filed, and that's why file is important, it will start to get the attention that is required. And I know it's sad that we have to say this, but one thing I've learned after about 10 years of knocking on doors and trying to make change, it is a marathon. It's a long one, but you've got to be consistent and keep going. So continue to file complaints when something happens to bring it to the Department of Transportation's attention. And based on recent changes that even this month, we maybe we can expect that there will be improvements under the recent legislation and DOT protections for travelers with disabilities, that we may see that the filing the complaints starts to pick up and starts to increase the number of changes that we're seeing. And if you recall from a few slides back, I believe that right now this is the brightest it's been. And to keep it going, filing complaints and creating awareness, advocating for this is going to result in change. The other one I wanted to bring your attention to, and someone asked the question of the boarding. You have the right to be treated with dignity and respect, and the right to assistance when you're on board an aircraft. And part of that right to dignity is if you ask the board early, it shouldn't be questioned. If you have an invisible disability to go on, it's just that you need to board early for disability. And so dignity and respect is warranted. And in this case, the individual travels a lot and is a non-visible disability. If you don't watch, and what we find a lot of times is airline in their policies are very inconsistent in terms of how they apply them. There is, and I will say, and this is what I'll attribute it to, a lack of training and understanding that disabilities are not only visible, but invisible. And there's a lack of watching and paying attention to see that someone does need assistance. And in this one, the assistance is the person cannot lift the bag up over their head to be able to put it into the overhead baggage container. And it has been many times when the flight attendants just stare or ask the person to get moving, to get their bag up there. And when they explain, then they get help, and or they have to ask other passengers for help. This is a training issue, and it's one of awareness of people who have invisible disabilities, do need and do have the right to be treated with respect and dignity and assistance on the airplane. And each time this happens, the individual notifies the CRO of the airline and also files airline incident reports in that. The experience continues, and they continue to file reports the next time it is filing with the DOT. On a positive note, working with CROs and airlines, airlines are very good at accommodating seat requests for those, for in the case of this one individual. But again, I bring these up because not all disabilities are visible. And when you encounter these types of situations, from no man land to when you board or needing assistance on the airline, file. The only way we're going to make change, whether it's from training to enforcement, is by filing and creating awareness. And those complaints that you file are very much a form of advocacy for change. And don't stop just because you may not get that answer. I can tell you the person from the no man land experience continues to file and continues to create awareness that this needs to be addressed. So asking what's the take from an advocacy group, from an advocate, and also from personal experience, you've got to be persistent and consistent. We've often heard that that constant dripping wears down the stone, and that's what's happening right now. Is constant dripping is wearing down that stone, but you got to notify that CRO, file with the airlines, file with the DOT, and if you're not getting the issue addressed, you have that right to take and file a congressional inquiry in that. Or the more that you file, the more that it gets the attention of those who can make change and can help to solve these problems. It's also important to know your rights in that, and don't lose heart. That $50 million fine would not have been possible without complaints filed with the US DOT. So from my perspective, I was asked to present, and that filing is important, and it's not just on the what situations that you think you should file. If you have a disability, visible or invisible, please file and continue to file. So and I guess this is where I take some questions.
Yes, are you ready for some questions and answers, Steve?
I am ready for questions.
Perfect. All right, let me get my screen up here. And you're right, don't lose heart. And it sounds like in the chat, we have some great advocates here today. So I'm so thankful for the information you shared. Let's get into it. So we have some questions that were submitted upon registration. We'll start with some of those. What is the realistic time frame to when we will be able to fly in our own power chairs?
Yes, and I'm being recorded on this, so I'm going to I know I've seen announcements that, and I've read where there are some sources that are saying it could be as early as 2025. And I truly hope that they're right, but if I believe it is much longer than that. If you could get everything lined up, the process wouldn't be too long, because we know it's technically feasible. We know that engineering design is not an issue. We will be testing, going to another round of crash testing at the National Institute of Aviation Research this summer on restraint systems against FAA standards for emergency landings and that for those airworthiness. And so we know that's correct. But to put it in perspective, if you were to take a new seating arrangement for a first class, it normally takes 3 to 6 years from concept to implementation. You go through the design and development, and that's normally 1 to 2 years, test and certification 1 to 2 years, and then installing it and rolling it out another 1 to 2 years. But there's a lot of hurdles here too that goes beyond just the technical requirements of doing it. There's also there are stakeholders that want to see such things as the financial part to this. And one of the things that was in the FAA Reauthorization Act that was just passed is a requirement to do a study on the fiscal and the budget piece of putting a space on an aircraft for a wheelchair. So we pushed that, and that was one of the things we advocated for in 2023 and 2024 to go in there to take and knock down that wall as well. So it can be done within a few years if all of these things are put into place. We're very encouraged that working with FAA that our next test, the data that we get, we will provide to them, and we provide it to the airlines as well to help them with setting up the standards. And I know one of the first things that they're trying to do is to put in place the FAA standards required for a restraint system, a wheelchair restraint system on aircraft. So, and I'm sorry this is taking a little longer, but this question, I wish it would be faster. It's closer than it was a decade ago, but it's going to take breaking down a couple more walls. But there are people out there working on solutions and engineering and that. So if everyone says we're going to do it, it could be done in probably 3 to 6 years.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephen. I'm sure our audience is thankful for all the details you can provide. I have another one. Actually, this question came up a lot of questions about bathrooms on airplanes. When can we expect the restroom on planes to be more accessible, and what has been done so far around this issue?
Yeah, I know there may be a couple others on this webinar. I think it would be a better, could give a better answer in terms of timeline. But I mean, there are a number of, it's being worked, and there's a number of engineering and testing going on, but it's, I'd probably ask for if someone else can give me a hand on that one as far as the exact timeline. Our focus is a lot of times on the restraint systems and the actual wheelchairs and that.
Hey, Steve.
Yes. Oh, perfect. Thanks,
This is
Shannon.
Shannon, and I'm actually just going to point out what Danica had added in the chat in response to Kristen's question. The Department of Transportation passed regulation that will require single aisle aircrafts. Nearly all domestic flights are on planes with a single aisle to have accessible restrooms. It's in the works now. And then it looks like she also dropped a link to a chat. It looks like the rule, a PDF of the rule. So, Danica, I don't know if you want to add more to.
This is Danica. I would recommend looking at the requirements of the regulation itself, because it depends on a few things. If it is like an airplane that was just delivered or newly certified. So there are nuances. So I don't even want to say it's in the near future, because I know it's not, if this is a problem affecting people today, but it is a regulation that was passed. A lot of the advocacy for this came from the individuals and presenters on this call, but there are regulations. They will be here if you want to go in the aircraft manufacturer's view soon, but it's not soon enough, but they are going to be required.
Yeah, and this is Steve. It's going to be phased when it comes out, because as Danica was stating, you have new aircraft in which it can be designed and engineered, and then there's retrofitting current fleets once they go into that, and that would be a phased approach. It will take time, and in terms of that one, it's moving, but it's on all of these. They're not moving as fast as we would like. I mean, I've been with All Wheels Up now for 6 years, and I would have liked to have seen that they were testing a wheelchair spot on aircraft by now, but we're still, a few years out on that. But I know we're getting close to starting to see that the steps they need to take to get to that point.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Steve, I do have to wrap it up, but I want to finish up with a question. How do we become an advocate with All Wheels Up?
With All Wheels Up, there's a website, and I apologize, I did not take and put it on the slides, but please reach out to us. Our website is allwheelsup.org, and that we focus on the technical stuff. And any of our advocacy, when we go in, it's about accessible air travel. And we do rely on coalitions and partnerships with PVA and MDA and other organizations that are doing great work. But we are always looking for people with the background that can help us, from FAA to engineering to even the medical side. We look at the human factors part of a wheelchair space on aircraft. So, and I guess it's easy for me to make my information available afterwards. I know Sarah can probably get that out, or
Yep, it looks like Shannon actually put your website in the chat for everyone to see.
thank you.
And so, yeah, thank you so much, Steve. And I'm just going to go ahead and wrap it up here. If you could just stay with me for just a little bit longer. If you are new to MDA and have been diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease under MDA's umbrella, or if you are a loved one of someone who is diagnosed, we encourage you to stay engaged with us at MDA. You can do this by visiting mda.org/join and completing a short form. Joining is free and will keep you up to date on the latest research, educational programs, and supports. Before we go, I want to highlight some upcoming MDA community education events that you may be interested in. You can learn more about these events by visiting our website, scanning the QR code on your screen, or clicking the link in the chat box. Excuse me. First, MDA will be hosting 2 webinars next week, including updates in Friedreich's ataxia, which will discuss the status of research in FA, help increase patients' understanding of current care and treatment approaches, and empower patients and caregivers with information and resources. Next week, we will also be having a webinar on care and planning resources for adults with neuromuscular disease, which will be held on January 28th from 3:30 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. This webinar will review common work accommodations, explain how to obtain and navigate benefits such as SSI, SSDI, and discuss transitioning to a higher level of care as an adult, including home health care and long-term care and skilled nursing. I also want to provide another link. I know we linked it before in the chat for you to learn more and to register to become an MDA advocate. As you heard from Shannon today, the MDA advocacy team is hard at work on their agenda and can use your support. So feel free to click the link in the chat box for more information. Again, we would like to thank Amicus Therapeutics for supporting today's webinar. And we would love to hear your comments about today's webinar. After the conclusion of our presentation, you will receive an email with a survey regarding today's presentation. Completing that survey will provide us with important insights as we plan for future educational programs. If anyone has any questions after this webinar, please feel free to contact the MDA's Resource Center at 833-ASK-MDA1 or email resourcecenter@mdausa.org, and we will be sure to get back to you. Thank you again today to our amazing speakers for your time and your expertise. And this concludes today's webinar, and we hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.